Welcome back to the Pilgrim Faith Podcast, where human wonder fuels the quest for Christian wisdom. Today, Dale and I are very happy to be joined by our good friend Kyle, who I'll introduce a little bit more in a moment. Just to give a little background here, this is the first time we have ever had one of our regular listeners on the podcast. And this is because Kyle, pretty early, I'd say, in Dale and I's podcast journey, began corresponding with us. And over time, we found him to be just such a wise and engaging listener, and also just had such a pile of insights of his own about things that Dale and I care about quite a lot. One of the things we've talked about a lot on our podcast is the challenge in the modern world of forming communities where people really see each other. Perhaps it could be said that in a lot of communal arrangements in the past, the very architecture of life, if you will, involves so much mutual exposure. That there's a kind of vulnerability written into the very experience of things. Whereas in our context, it's very easy to really live unseen, to live a very isolated existence, and especially in modern kind of metropolitan urban contexts, not small towns, if you will. In fact, building that kind of mutual exposure requires strategy. It requires intentionality. You have to choose, to some extent, a certain degree of vulnerability for that to go, for that to work. Maybe one of the challenges that's worth mentioning as we try to reconceive what a healthy mutual exposure and mutual vulnerability might look like. That's especially challenging, I think, in the world of men, and perhaps especially challenging in a world where men have perhaps for a few generations been trained to imagine that masculinity is almost defined by being an isolated person in every man's home, his castle, bearing all his burdens alone and depending on nobody. Whereas perhaps the more classical model is that men bear burdens for one another, and that precisely is what enables them to go bear the burdens of the world that they're called to. And so there's all these questions that come up because we haven't maybe had these spaces for a while. And so there's questions that come up about, decorum, what's going too far, what really is kind of like, okay, yeah, that's kind of weird, we don't need to go do that, versus what is actually healthy. And it seems to me that Kyle is involved in a project in his own life and in his own community that is at least an instance of what it looks like, perhaps, to build these kinds of relationships in a way that it sounds to me is very non-corny and very helpful for men, and maybe a helpful, just a model to think about just community building in the modern world in a larger way. So I guess Dale, before I can pass it straight to Kyle. Okay, so Kyle, tell us a little bit about, I guess, what you do, and sort of started this conversation.
Yeah, so in churches, and that's kind of the context that I've been doing this in. You've got like your small groups and stuff where people are, the goal is for people to be known, to spend time with each other and everything. But we were just noticing how that there was some deeper ways in which we weren't able to know each other, just for the sake of time and the space and everything that it takes to do that. And so we started going through some material and in these other groups that were sort of like supplemental to normal community life, just as a way of really spending more time, walled off time together. And where we really had a place that was safe for people to share things and not worry that they would be exposed for it. Places where, as smaller groups of people, you could share, very vulnerable things that you might not want to share in a mixed audience where, kids are around and it's mixed gendered and it's hard to share things. And just coming together and spending a good deal more time with each other as well. So we would just come together like once a week and share our stories with each other for like, just a few minutes, and then just have times where we respond to each other and encourage each other and ask hard questions to really dig in to understanding ourselves better, and then ultimately to encourage each other in the Lord.
Yeah. I recently took Jordan Peterson's personality test on the big 5 personality traits that he's identified. I scored in the 99th percentile for openness. So if you're in a room of 100 people, chances are there's only one person that's more open than you.
Dale's a hippie, as it turns out. Yeah.
Well, and I say that to say that this conversation is something that I have been part of, maybe not in the sort of carefully thought through strategic way that you're thinking through it, Kyle, which is why we wanted to talk with you about it. But I've noticed that, especially like in the church world, what you just said there was very helpful, because I almost have a very hard time knowing when not to be open with people. So if it's like a mixed gendered or their kids around, I'll just share. Now, I'm not sort of crass and I don't overshare, but I've always just had this posture towards people because my thinking was, we're here in church. I'm a sinner. You're a sinner. We sin. We have very, very hard things that are going on in life. Let me tell you about it. And most of the conversations, particularly among men, revolve around like this, the Packers are playing at 1 today. They're playing the Seahawks. Can't wait to get home. Or, this is how work was this week. These are the projects. So it was always sort of like a very superficial approach to relationships. And especially in the church, I was like, we're here talking about cosmic things and things that go, from the cosmos all the way down into the deepest, darkest recesses of human soul. It seems like our conversation should revolve around those things, at least in this space. But I think that what you're saying is, if you get people in the right space, with some presupposed principles that everyone is sort of aware of and agree to adopt as principles, then we can open up lines of communication for genuine community building around our personal narratives of redemption. So I laud you for the attempt to sort of formalize it and put structure to it. Because as Joe said in the opening, we do have to be intentional in the modern age, because we can choose. I can choose to wake up, get in my car that's inside of my garage, drive 30 minutes to my building, walk outside for 1 minute, go inside my cubicle for 9 hours, get back into my car, drive into my garage, and go back into my house. And I will have spent a total of 30 minutes really maybe interacting with another human that I'm not forced to. So talk to us about, number one, what does it look like in what you're doing? If there are presupposed principles, what are they? And then what are you experiencing trying to do this project?
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I mean, for me, my story is kind of important with this too. Like, I came from, your cage stage Calvinist Reformed kind of upbringing, and I think I scoffed at the ideas of the therapeutic kind of stuff, and language bothered me. And I was kind of resistant when we first started going. I joined with this thing at our church probably 8 years ago or something, to help as a leader. And I was kind of resistant to a lot of the sweet kind of encouragements towards God's love and empathizing with each other and that kind of thing. It felt very like soft on sin, soft on God's holiness. And I realized in that process, like, I was very, very unaware of myself and the things that were motivating me, and the deep shame and insecurity that I had within me that made me sort of drawn and to that sort of mentality. And it really just took me sitting in that for some time, and then kind of just asking the hard questions, like, is God's love something that I should sort of poo-poo on, and it's like, it's kind of ridiculous even to think that. And since then, I've sort of like built a sort of like functional arsenal, I guess, of different voices and for me personally, like it took me sitting in scripture more, asking those kinds of questions. It took me sitting and reading the old guys more, like Calvin. I've got some quotes here from Calvin, like on Ephesians 3, and Calvin literally says that God is saying in through Ephesians 3, where Paul talks about his prayer for the church at Ephesus, that literally the highest blessing and knowledge for us and wisdom that we can have, I mean, he's almost hyperbolic in the way that he talks about it, is to know God's love for us. And he just says it like that. And it's just kind of like, oh, wait a minute, that kind of challenges my assumptions about what my focus should be as a Christian. And then, Paul's prayer is for the believing Ephesian church to grow in their understanding of God's love for them. And so it leads to the question of like, well, how does that actually happen? How do we actually grow in understanding God's love for us? And I think sort of experientially for me, and as I'm reading things like that, the pieces kind of started coming together, that it really took other people around me being able to sort of mirror and reflect back to me the reality of God's word in a way that would challenge my assumptions. And maybe every once in a while I would slip up and say something that was a little more honest than I even realized, the sort of like implicit theology that I had, which was very shame driven. It was very mixed with anti-gospel sentiments, and I was unaware of it. I thought for sure that I was very reformed and everything. So Bonhoeffer's whole thing in Community was just so powerful when I read it, because I had kind of already been experiencing this. But he says, and I know I'm ranting now, so I'm gonna
no.
So Bonhoeffer, and it's interesting, he's talking about in the context here about justification and our sort of ongoing perception and experience of our present justification. And he says, therefore, the Christian needs another Christian who speaks God's word to him. He needs him again and again when he becomes uncertain and discouraged, for by himself he cannot help himself without belying the truth. He needs his brother man as a bearer and a proclaimer of the divine word of salvation. He needs his brother solely because of Jesus Christ. The Christ in his own heart is weaker than the Christ in the word of his brother. His own heart is uncertain, his brother's is sure.
Wow. That's just beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, actually, that's a great segue to maybe something to ask you about, because one of the tensions I perceive in a contemporary context, and I think there needs to be a lot of compassion for this, is that I see, I understand, I think I am, there's types of men out there, in the old days, you could talk about like, the girly girls and the tomboys, right? But roughly speaking, there's, your sensitive guys and your, that kind of thing, and your super masculine dudes. And it's true that there's something in a lot of men in kind of modern church spaces. They enter them and everybody's talking about empathy, and the music is sentimental, and the guys that get into it are not the guys with beards that look like this. They don't look like Dale, typically, one or two of them, and so there's this perception that like, only that kind of guy can get into that kind of thing. I'm a dude, and I'm, and there's values and things, if I'm trying to believe and hope all things and try and put it in the most positive spin possible, there's values and burden bearing thought to be at stake in sort of just abandoning that maybe internal emotional rigidity, which is part of the way you help the world as well. And yet I wonder if one way to talk about this would actually be to say men actually need to cultivate a profoundly robust emotional life, precisely for the kind of gifts that they bring to that life, for the ordering, for the direction, so that, and that reminded me of it, because again, it's as though men coming together and bearing one another's burdens. I know Dale and I's marriages, both of our wives have said to each of us how happy they are that Dale and I exist. because we bear burdens for each other that our wives can't bear for us. And it serves us going back into our marriages and homes to have our burdens borne by a brother and then by God himself, really. And it serves you to go press back into the home, into the community. And I wonder if one way of kind of drawing men to this sort of thing is to say that, hey, actually tapping into those, having the courage, in a sense, the fortitude to tap into those deepest things and actually endure them, to really endure the emotional discomfort of seeing yourself, of being seen, of seeing others, so that actually you can in a way, inhabit your own story of redemption and actually come to a greater orderedness, so that you can go back and actually execute a lot of the things that you do care about, your impulse to go fight a battle. But this will actually help you know which battle to fight. This will direct your sword, not from the gut, but actually from the head. But maybe that leads to the question of, by the way, one last thing. If we don't do it, I often think that if men become the calloused ones to the cries out in the street, then it will be the world of women that feels the need to bear the entire burden of the suffering of this world. And that's actually to abandon our burden-bearing calling. And I think that
which could be defined as effeminate. I mean, if you use Aquinas, if you run away from that which is good, if you abandon that which is good because of your desire, then that is effeminacy. And if this is a good project and this pushes people towards the good, and you run away from it because of an ill-conceived perception of masculinity, that ironically could be effeminate. Your pursuit of this meme of masculinity,
Yeah. And that, so to kind of roll all of that, and I think that's a good point, Dale, it's sort of into a question. Let's talk about decorum, so like because I think that's going to matter to a lot of people. I think we can all understand, and I think Kyle would say this as well, we can all imagine entering a space where most dudes who struggle with vulnerability are going to be like, nope, nope, not doing the thing. It's too sentimental. It's too catched in dumb phrases. It's too precious momentsy. How do you build a space that has some degree of decorum? And I think decorum is in the process of shifting. Maybe that's not even the way to put it. How do you build a space that's substantive? You were talking about even the design of the space, the where you are to do it. And maybe it pings back to Dale's question, the mix of substantive and kind of talking about the weather chit chat conversation. How do you, I guess, cultivate something that, you yourself are an example. You can understand what it's like to feel this way and then embrace something. How do you put out that fragrance, I guess?
Yeah. Man, there's a lot there. I think it's helpful just to sort of have like the rules of the game kind of laid down early on, where you sort of have like an established whatever you think is necessary. And there's some general principles that every group will kind of need to have in order to have the structure and the space available, where you just sort of, you want to have like guardrails set up against the sort of normal etiquette and culture that you would normally have coming together, that would lead you to sort of go off the rails when things get uncomfortable. Because that's literally what happens is if it gets comfortable, usually you just sort of go in a different direction. If somebody feels uncomfortable with you encouraging them, or if a hard question is asked about sin and that kind of thing. And there's a sense in which it's just, if you're going to get vulnerable, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going into a space. And so usually with these groups, like what we've been doing, you kind of go into it with the expectation that like, yeah, we're going to be sharing our stories, and that means I'm going to have to share some stuff that I don't really talk about that much. And that's uncomfortable. And people kind of have to like get their head into that before you come there. And people are usually kind of coming in a little bit like nervous and humble. Like, I don't know what's about to happen. I don't know what these people are going to be talking about. I don't know what they're going to ask me. And there's just a sense of coming into a space like that where it's not an ordinary space that you would come into where you're just comfortable talking about the weather. Like we literally were like, we would say like, we're not doing that. We're not going to talk about the superficial things. This time we're going to really dedicate to being really honest. And that could mean, I think this group is stupid and you guys are all just a bunch of sissies and you're like talking about your feelings too much and you need to be more reformed or whatever it is, and that's fine. I would just respond. If somebody said that, I would just say, well, why do you feel like that? Like why is that? I mean, I've had to answer questions like that. And I've had, older guys just completely, stump me with stuff like that. But there is a real sense in which, that we're all quite a bit more broken than we want to acknowledge. And sometimes it just takes coming together with some space set up where we can sit down in a room together, where somebody is leading that group to where they're responsible for keeping it on the rails. And we can all share the agreement. Like we want to do this thing right now. We want to actually open up, share a little bit, and then not jump in and just sort of do the back and forth. Like, well, me too. Let me tell you about my stuff. And then the next person, oh, well, me too. And then it just kind of dwindles versus, somebody sharing something and people meaningfully listen and really spend time digging into that person's story where the attention can actually be on a person for a length of time in a meaningful way. And there's just something about that. Like that was one of the things that really got me was, like for instance, I had not considered myself to be somebody who dealt with shame. And I would say something like, well, I know that there's lots of people that have shame stuff, so it's good to talk about that. But that's not really like my issue. I have fear of man. That's my issue. And as I was sharing about my fear of man to the group that was manifesting in sort of relational discord that I would have and that kind of thing, nervousness being around people. One of the guys just looked up at me and was like, hey, it sounds like the word I'm thinking of as you're sharing is you feel worthless. And it hit me like a 10-ton of bricks because that sounded way too dramatic and weird and awkward to think about myself as feeling worthless or something like that. But through somebody else sort of putting a different vocabulary that maybe felt just a little bit too uncomfortable and below me or something like that, I just realized, man, like maybe I'm not seeing myself as clearly as this person's seeing me right now. And then all of a sudden I realized, shame is something that's just sort of been on my shoulder as like the voice that I'm hearing in my head all the time. And it just is the dialogue that I'm having with myself most of the time.
Yeah.
And I'm just completely unaware of it.
You're like the Hulk. I'm always ashamed.
One thing I think it's important. So I think that this conversation is very important. One of the things that should be understood, I think, before you begin, you begin to do this with another man or a group of men, is you really do have to count the cost. You have to assess the risk of what it is you're actually going to be engaged in. Because it is risky to be vulnerable. And it's risky to be vulnerable precisely because you are giving another human being ammunition that could be used against you to destroy you. And that has to be a very present thought. Now, that should not create so much fear that you run away from a project like this. But it does need to sort of be in the air of everyone understanding what they're doing, and, say, commit that you're not going to take the weakness of your brother, because humans are so mean sometimes. So I run a school down here, and I watch how children try to emotionally damage the other child in little ways. Like just little like huffs and puffs when they're talking, right? Like they're doing it intentionally to hurt that child. And now I'm not saying they're totally malevolent, but it's just part of us to take weakness, spot it, and then if we are inhabited by the devil to use that weakness against that person to ruin them. And you do just have to go into something like this with your eyes wide open, knowing that that could be a part of what you experience. Now, if you've got a good group of godly men that have been living life together, hopefully you have a bit more confidence. So like when Joe and I talk, I never think Joe is going to sort of run out on Facebook and just post all of my stuff. But I don't know. I mean, he could go crazy one day and not be the Joe I know anymore. And then, I'll have to run away. But anyway, I want to draw attention to that because I do think it's important for people to know what the risk of being vulnerable means, Yeah.
If I could just add something to that too. So, any of the concerns that you could have, you could almost think about it along the lines of, okay, well then what kind of structure or guardrail can I put up for that might help? So it's not going to eliminate that. There's always going to be risk there when we're vulnerable. By definition, you're stepping into a risky situation. People can and will hurt you. And as a leader, I've gotten just railroaded by people. But if there's maybe a rule, like if somebody's sharing something vulnerable, we're going to hold off on rebuking that brother or giving them some sort of exhortation. And let's not do that as the first move, so maybe there is a legitimacy that needs to be discussed later, but let's, we followed like Paul Tripp's instruments in the Redeemer's hands, and his sort of like movement pattern is love, know, speak, do. And so you start off by loving somebody, you get to know them by asking more questions and understanding what's going on. And then maybe later on in the process, you begin to speak more into their life and then, give them direction on what to do. But it's just not the first move that you make usually. And usually that safeguards enough to where if you give the dum-dum that's going to do the violent rebuke immediately and just completely miss what's happening in that moment, and they don't recognize how vulnerable that person is, which I've been that person, by the way, the dum-dum. But you don't recognize what's happening and how it feels when you're, as a grown man, to share something and you're like, man, you could just crush me right now, and just to have somebody, even though I know they're just saying the right thing to me in that moment, just to have somebody say, man, brother, that just sounds really tough. And yeah, of course you probably have sin mixed in there. Sure. But man, that sounds hard. And I'm just really sorry. And it makes me sad that you're going through that right now. And it hurts me that you're hurting. I'm like, thank you. Like, wow. Like, that it's meaningful, like it's the right thing to say. And yeah, like, but just having somebody that's able to respond that way to you, it's wild how you can know and have said that to people so many times, and it still is a meaningful thing. And I'm still nervous if I'm confessing something right now today, if I go and, sin and confess it to somebody and that person says something sharp back to me that demeans me or something, it's going to hurt, And so anyway, yeah.
It's fascinating to me, this, I was just talking to Dale about this, I think in the last week, that this kind of genre of the sometimes I call them like pastoral drive-by rebukes. Yeah. And it's, there's I've been a cage stager as well. I remember the kind of psychology of like, a thing that is rebukable, I guess I'm supposed to go rebuke it, and it's very kind of beep boop, robot brain going on there. But what's very fascinating is now I can, again, just like you said, I've been the dum-dum too. You can kind of step outside of it almost as an alien looking at just little humans in a cage communicate. And you're like, that guy who, was born naked into this world just went up to those guys who were born naked into this world, and they don't know him at all. And he doesn't know them at all. And he just was like, thus saith the Lord, and then walked away. And it's like, that guy's just a jerk. Like that guy is scripted. He's LARPing. He's scripting himself into this like prophet role where it's like, you're just a dude. And like, you're like, and you don't, that's not your awareness in a sense. And that's one of the interesting things about, it sounds, I mean, for me and for you, it sounds like to kind of come out of that, involves coming to the awareness that, actually all the things I'm rebuking are in me.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't want anybody staring at me that way, because
Mhm.
like I deserve everything that I'm, sort of
Mhm.
giving out. Yeah.
Yeah, so everything that we're saying is correct, and I was also the dum-dum as well for a very, very long time. And I felt, you get the prophet complex. You're like, well, the prophets did it. They just walked around, condemning whole nations. And then you take the model of Jesus, like Jesus said this thing to these people very directly. And then you take like Paul telling the Galatians to emasculate themselves. The way that I would justify my sort of drive-by rebuke-ism is by saying, well, look, it's in the Bible. This is a biblical model for exhortation and calls to repentance. And I've had to really come out of that, because there are also instances where Jesus is like dealing with an adulteress, and he gets to know her, and he's trying to deal with her as a full person. And Jesus's whole move towards everyone was precisely as whole people. And my move towards people in the drive-by rebuke was not dealing with them as a whole person. It was dealing with them as this particular manifestation of this sin that is obvious to me. And what does that do for them? It's not dealing with their soul and their body together. It's just like calling out an act. And that's why I think that, this idea that once you get to, I love what you said there, Kyle, about sort of like listen, get to know them first. And that really is key. If I know your story, and I know that language, I understand how it hits certain years. It's like, oh, here it goes. But seriously, like we all are living a story. The Bible is a story. History is a story. The man is the microcosm of the macrocosm. It's all a story of redemption. And when I know you, and I know what you're going through, I know what the problems at home are, what you're dealing with children, your wife, your friendships, your work, just the whole litany of what it means to be alive. Now I can, with a scalpel, begin to do work instead of just shotgun blast, which is very inefficient by any metric. And so you really do have to get to the motivation. What am I trying to do when I rebuke? Am I just sort of like running around with a shotgun going, I'm the prophet of God? Or are you really caring for people the way
and
that
then
Jesus
posting about
did?
it on Facebook? Look at these people I just shotgun blasted on Twitter.
Yes.
It's like, all right, bro.
Yeah, and I really do think, and I don't want to get into sort of diagnosing all the reasons why we're here, but like social media has not helped this. I just recorded a podcast with our good friend Shane Morris at the Colson Center on Upstream about podcasts. And he talked a little bit about Twitter just being a space that people go to destroy other people. Like, oh, great. Now we have internet spaces that are just designed to hurt people. What could go wrong, civilization? So it's not that there's no place for rebuke. It's that what are you trying to do with rebuke? Are you trying to have them appreciate and come to a fuller understanding of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ and let that move the sin out? Or are you just trying to fill some sort of internal prophetic LARPy impulse that gets your little...
It's a story. You're scripting yourself. What you're really doing is imagining I belong in the story of the Covenanters, and here I am, Samuel Rutherford with my big beard, calling out the whatever, that kind of thing. And it's like every guy thinks that about, in some version. Maybe one way of talk about stories, because one of the I was thinking of I was telling Dale this also this last week. I've been reading through Paul's epistles and 2 Corinthians, especially the Corinthian correspondence, especially. And it's funny because it pings to this point Dale just made about, kind of people point to Bible passages. Paul's mean, so I can be mean too. But when you look at Paul, if we're really using Paul as a model, the amount of emotional exposure he gives in his epistles. Hey guys, I was thinking about coming this time, and I don't want you to think that I was not coming. Was I really wavering? Well, no, because yes and amen. And when you read through the epistles, the amount of explaining exactly my motivations, because I didn't want you guys to feel this way, and I anticipate. And my favorite one, it was actually, I laughed reading the Bible. There's this great passage, I think in 2 Corinthians 8, that Paul is basically coming to pick up money from the Corinthians for the Jerusalem. And they had already promised to give him money, but Paul basically says, but I wanted to forewarn you that I'm going to ask you to make good on the promise when I come. And I wanted to tell you now, because I wanted you to give me out of liberality rather than, sort of from, envy. And what Paul is anticipating is, if I arrive and on the day that I get there and like, hey guys, you told me you give me some money, I'm here to collect, everybody's going to be like, oh, and so Paul is actually anticipating their weakness and kind of setting up the giving of them in good cheer and all that sort of thing. And there's just enormous amount of knowing what he's working with, kind of accommodation to the weakness, also an unveiling of his own motivations. He has the emotional intelligence of a cult leader, but he precisely avoids that because Paul is incredibly vulnerable. He's completely non-manipulative with what he's trying to do to you and get your mind. One, thought that maybe comes out of that is Paul is dealing with whole persons, and it's unclear to me that we can really deal with whole persons, anticipate their weaknesses, move around them, be a Jew to Jew and Greeks to Greeks. Really broken down, that means I mirror Dale to Dale and Kyle to Kyle on a certain level. I respond to the story that is your relational style that's informed by your whole existence. And I try to minister to you precisely by playing off of that. And maybe that's a very long-winded way of saying, I don't know that we can really interact with people really without knowing their stories. And so maybe this is one way of kind of throwing it over and saying, what role does kind of story, like really having a sense of your own whole life and others' whole life play in that ministry to each other?
Yeah, I think, and it's really interesting because I know that stories for like some people is like a loaded kind of postmodern, cool, new Calvinist kind of mentality stuff. And there's the whole debate with stories versus propositional truth and like the back, and it's kind of like you can get into the weeds on that, and that's not my interest at all. I think that just showing the value of how stories can be a positive thing. I think that it's really is a little more basic than that and a little more simple than some of the ways that it gets talked about. And it's just something as simple as like, if I was to tell you I am struggling with anger with my wife, I could just say it abstractly as an idea, this idea of anger, and me and my wife are fighting. And I think it was either Paul Tripp or David Pallison talked about, they were counseling some couple, and it was like you need to get more specificity than that. And you need to, like, what exactly is happening when you talk about this anger and fighting? And so the counselor in their mind is thinking, oh, well, they're probably arguing or something like that. Well, they started talking about it, and they're like, well, the other day we pulled out guns and we were shooting at each other across the house. And you're like, whoa, not what I was anticipating, Yeah. And so we have all these assumptions about what somebody, when they say lust, a man struggling with lust. Oh, well, I know exactly what he's saying when he says that. He's looking at porn. Versus he's been picking up prostitutes downtown. That's a very different reality. And so how are you going to know that unless somebody sort of spells out the sort of time and place events of what's going on with more detail? That's the very thing that's vulnerable usually that we don't want to share is, hey, it was last night, time and space at 9 p.m. I pulled out my phone and browsed around some things that I shouldn't have. And that's, so that feels a lot more vulnerable. And, but there's a value in stories like that, or for that reason, because they're filling out the details of things in ways in which sort of an abstract idea is not going to really give you the picture there. And so there's a sense, we think about it too in terms of how is the truth that I know about God abstractly, the propositional truth, why is it not sort of resonating in my heart? Well, like our imaginations are usually not caught up with it. We're not really seeing it in its fullness in a way that captures our imaginations. And usually when we sort of build out through the revelation that God gives us in this whole story of Israel, that is interacting with God in time and space, and this is the way they act, and then God responds to them in a certain way, and we're like, oh, so when God says he's wrathful, that's what he means, or David sinning and Nathan coming to him and being like, this is what you did, David. This is the ugliness of what you did. It has you furious and wanting to kill this guy, and you're that guy. And it took a story for him to sort of draw out from David that deep resonance within his heart and soul that wanted to act so intensely against it. So there's a sense in which, as we're sharing our stories, we're sort of understanding each other better. We're experientially sort of relating to each other, and our imaginations are caught up with all the different things are going on there that really gives substance to the sort of abstract truth that we might say otherwise.
Yeah, that's interesting, because even in if I'm adding a philosophical spin, I suppose, but I think sometimes people have the impression that the stories are the scaffolding and the real stuff is the abstractions, and it really is the reverse. All of the metaphysical and moral descriptions of these things are the scaffolding based upon which this conversation right now between 3D, this is reality right here. People talking and living their lives and being with their wives and thinking is also part of reality. But all of that is scaffolding, shoving this out of nothing. This is actually this place where God is communing with us and in the world. And so, that you're right. Like, I kind of forget, because I haven't read that stuff for a while, that stories can kind of connote this kind of postmodern, cool kids buzzword thing. But I'm so persuaded at this point that even on sort of deep historical traditional theology, the significance of an individual of the actual textures of life and living it are precisely what needs to be stared at in order to understand the Christian life and reality.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about, and specifically with stories, when somebody knows you on a deeper register than just I say hi to Frank and we talk for 10 minutes about our job or whatever. The reason that is necessary, or for all the reasons we're talking about, but also human beings want to be seen. Like, they really do want to be seen. Even the people, I have friends of mine that I would consider very introverted, very withdrawn, very closed off. But it's very hard to be like that with me for long because I just start saying things. And what I notice is even those very sort of withdrawn personalities, when they have a moment where they feel like you're actually seeing them, they begin to open up. Now, it might be relative to their personality, but it's something that's a movement away from where they were just a moment before. And it's because they feel seen. And I think that this is a deeply human desire. And God tells us that he sees us. There's something about a face. You will behold the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. There's a reason for the incarnation. There's a bunch of reasons for the incarnation. But Jesus comes and he takes on our nature to, in one sense, to help us relate to God in a story. We participate in that, and he sees us. He actually knows me through and through. And I think that this is one of the reasons earlier, Kyle, you mentioned it was very hard for you to appreciate and come to accept God's love for you. I still struggle with that. I've struggled with that a lot. And I think the reason is because you understand, we talked about this, a couple episodes ago, Joe. Calvin talks about this reciprocity between the knowledge of yourself and the knowledge of God. And the deeper that you understand yourself, it does become harder to believe that God loves you. But God loves you because of his own good pleasure, but he loves you by seeing all of you. And so on a certain sense, like I think Joe loves me and we're friends, but God loves me much more and God knows me much deeper than Joe knows me. So it's this weird thing we do. But I think our relationships can flourish and communities become healthy and strong and stable. That's the irony. A lot of people think you get a bunch of men in the room talking about the emotions, stability sort of goes because they're all sort of emotionally frantic. It's quite the opposite. When people are seen and people develop strong bonds of trust, those communities are very stable. The networks are very thick. And I think what we're experiencing right now in America anyway is the fallout of fractured relationships, isolated persons within communities, forming their own little ideological bubbles in the interwebs. And that is causing the instability on some register.
Yeah, we don't elect for vulnerability, we elect for ease.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that being seen is a component here.
Interestingly, I've this interesting phrase that Paul says in Galatians 4, where he says it's like he moves from the lesser to the greater and saying, now that you have come to know God, or rather that you are known by him. And it's interesting that it's almost like he's saying, or maybe he is, just flat out saying that to be known by God is the higher reality there. And that should be the motivator to not turn back to legalism. And there's something about that. Well, what is Paul talking about there? And it's being known biblically to be intimately, to have the experience of that intimate saving knowledge from God, to really have a sense. And there's something about, as you draw out and others draw you out before each other in vulnerability, all of a sudden you turn back and face God and you realize, oh wow, God's doing that with me too. Like, so the way in which I am opening myself up to become more honest and vulnerable with other people,
yes,
God actually wants me to come to him. And as I'm opening the word in my daily, reading and everything, I should be opening myself up and being that honest with God. And there is this experiential side of intimacy with God that is meant to be cultivated that way, where I need to bring, God knows everything, but me experientially, I need to put that before him honestly in order for us relationally, for that to manifest, in my experience. And there's something that's so special about that as I've grown in understanding these things, I've realized, oh wow, the level of communion and love that God has for and wants to have with me just is the end that he created us for. That is the goal, the direction that this whole thing is heading. So if there wasn't any other battles to fight with our culture or any other things going on that we needed to do, if we had all the knowledge and everything else, like what would be left to do? Or rather, like in heaven, what are we going to be doing? And there's a sense in which that is the goal that we're heading toward, is having fellowship with God, fellowship with each other in this deep knowledge and intimacy. And that is just something that we should be pressing into now as much as we can. And having that vision, if we, there's the whole mentality of like, you have the boundaries people who are always oriented toward the boundaries. And then there's the center people who are orienting toward the center focus. And there's a sense in which we, obviously we need to pay attention to the boundaries where we're getting out of line in different places. But if we lose the sense of the center, like what is the thing that we're supposed to be chasing after as Christians, like that will occupy us. And it will, like you were saying, it's not going to turn into chaos if we're all oriented toward this thing that really is that good and enjoyable. And then we can turn and fight the battles and stuff like that. But from a place of security and stability, that is God himself being at the center, and us coming alongside each other to help facilitate that more,
Yeah, that's a really interesting theme I find in Bavinck. I'd love to see a paper on Bavinck as the original theologian of diversity, who got it right before, over against a lot of, contemporary models. But this is one of the things he always says is the kingdom of God is full. The kingdom of God is fullness. It actually draws the whole profile. He gets very extreme. All nations, all personality types in all nations, all churches, all the things. The kingdom of God pulls it all because it pre-contains the perfections that are found distributed in each. And so through that seek first the kingdom of God. Of God. The word God is actually not kingdom, it's God, in a sense that it's the biggest word there. Seek that, and all these things shall be added unto you. I think one other thing that might be worth saying is that sometimes reticence to this can be rooted in a juxtaposition between the internal well-adjustedness of a leader and the lack of well-adjustedness in a lot of the sheep. And I think that if you're an internally well-adjusted person, you had good parents and your instincts just fire well, and you're kind of, emotionally managed and all those sorts of things, that doesn't automatically translate into helping others be that way. Actually. And sometimes those two are conflated. Sometimes and I'm not trying to talk about pastors or something here. I'm just saying, I think maybe the reticence can be rooted in almost a lack of imagination that this could be a problem for people, because it's not a problem for me. And so why do we need these kinds of spaces? And I think part of what that requires is just understanding, hey, not only is it just increasingly, is it just some people that are needing this sort of thing? It's actually most people. They call our generation, especially among millennials, are sometimes called the fatherless generation. We are not a well-adjusted civilization. We are not a firing, relationally well group of people. And in fact, Kyle, you mentioned your own story. It's sort of like, and even those who think they are, very often are missing things about themselves. But that was nevertheless, I'm just trying to add maybe one component of that is literally just kind of like a failure of imagination that needs to be corrected, rather than a sinister failure of, deeper love, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And the flip side of that too is true, I think. And so for me and my wife, we're both people who, whatever brokennesses that we came from are sort of hyper aware of relational things. And so there's a sense in which some people could just be overwhelmed with a burden, a sense that this is the thing that has to happen. Everything else needs to be sidelined. And to me, it seems like what I would like to try to do is help facilitate. And this is where, again, community is so helpful. Those people who are maybe a little less aware of themselves, and maybe they carry more than they realize, are able to be in a space where there's the hyper introspective people who are always wrestling with all the things, and just being able to sort of mutually disciple each other into a health and a balance there, where we're recognizing that, hey, there's a sense in which everybody needs to be a little bit more aware of themselves and a little bit more in tune with the fact that they're carrying emotional baggage around, and other people might be able to see it better than they can, and disciple them into the introspective thing. But then at the same time, those people can get totally lost in that and need somebody to pull them out, because they always are looking at themselves, like myself. And I need somebody to say, hey man, you're supposed to look to Jesus too every once in a while, and not get lost in yourself, and it's helpful to have that sort of community life where you're helping each other.
And in fact, sorry, Dale, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and that's all you're basically saying is we're sinners. Jesus, the wisdom of God is manifest in the body of Jesus. So really all you're saying is very basic stuff, and it's sad because I think like this basic thing has been lost. It's that your life helps me and my life helps you. And where you're strong, I'm weak, you help me. Where I'm strong, you're weak, I help you. But if you code the person that has a weakness that you don't share as just be more like me, dude, what's going on with you? Then you're not helping them.
Right.
That's actually, and so I guess you could phrase it like this. If the wisdom of God is made manifest in the church with the different parts contributing to the strength of the body, and you're not appreciating what's happening over here with this weakness, how can you make it stronger?
Right.
And if you're not in that project, that's literally the wisdom of God. What is not wisdom then? It's foolishness, it's folly. So this is just noticing that God has established the world this way. And wisdom falls into the things that God has established. And I think it does need to be said. And the sort of gag reflex that is in some circles when it comes to this conversation, not to attribute ill motives or malevolence or something, but perhaps it's a blind spot. Perhaps it's just blinded. And I could think of many ways that the devil would like to destroy the church through blind spots. So like be humans to one another.
And I think it's worth, reiterating for those who have that. I can, perhaps speak of this. One of the things that stands out to me, I guess, is that none of the things that we're talking about need to be framed as things that are pursued ultimately for their own sake.
Right.
There's a way in which human beings are always ends, and so just being seen and seeing others is an end in itself. There's an element of that, but the development of vulnerability, the development of the capacity to receive and give love, really, that is not a thing that is just meant to develop. The goal is not to develop men who don't know how to fight, but who just have big feelings so that they can go back and whatever. It's actually training more magnanimous soldiers. Again, you go read Lord of the Rings. It's so fascinating how the degree of emotional mutual exposure that occurs among these four little hobbits is almost embarrassing. It's like, I'm sorry, I didn't want your feelings, and we were worried about this. And like, there's these when you read the book, the conversations are almost like ridiculous to American Mary, that kind of masculinity, but only in that level of mutual lifting up in their weakness, because the hobbits have a kind of strength and a weakness. Only in that do they actually become these courageous, strong characters who go actually fight a real battle. And I just, we really, part of what we're saying here is that the battle that men ultimately are to fight in this world, men and women in general, but I guess we're speaking most directly to men in a sense here, it's not against flesh and blood. It's not that guy over there. That in some sense is a son of Adam and a daughter of Eve, even if they have communist ideas. Your first move, to go back to that language Kyle used, you might have to fight them on some register, but your first move is actually, your first motive is to win them because they're your brother. An idea might be my enemy, but they're not an idea. That's a person. And I am not just fighting an idea. I'm wanting to win a person. And actually, we need men with all of their fortitude, with all of their burliness and beardedness to stand up and win people, with all of the gravitas and strength that takes. And I think this move that you're talking, this whole conversation in a sense is that portal, in a sense, through which, and however it looks for you, you have to pass to gain the virtue, to gain the magnanimity, to go enter that space in a way that is just so unbelievably and deeply needed right now.
Yeah.
Amen, brother.
And just to say one more thing to that. There's so many different ways in which that's true. And I want to validate the concern from people that are nervous about the whole therapeutic thing in our time. And it's just that there's a mentality that you see in people sometimes that they are more emotionally frail as a result of their going to therapy and stuff like that. And it makes you wonder, well, wait a minute, what if the goal of this was to heal? Why do you seem to have to do all these extra things now to cope with life that you weren't doing before? And there's a sense in which, well, it gets worse before it gets better sometimes. But I think that there needs to be the clear goal that we're shooting for resilience. We're not shooting for sort of now we're going to just recognize how frail we are, and we're just going to be unable to do anything courageous or stern or hard or difficult, or, embrace our weakness in a way that, like a soldier, and there's a sense in which when you consider a soldier going into battle, if they have some sort of emotional crippling to where they're easily offended by their brother, and they're in the heat of battle, and that person says something that just offends them and distracts them from what they're doing in that mission, they're a detriment at that point to what's happening. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a silly example, but you could think of some example like that would fit, that, where people, as a result of not dealing with their issues and avoiding things that might be there, are harming other people, and potentially they are detrimental to the people around them. And it's not strength at that point. They're a liability at that point,
That's an interesting example, because soldiers are one of the very few places where this level of intimacy among men remains somewhat common. And it's because, in fact, that common mission, we're driving on a truck and we have to know we need to pull the trigger together, right? Or it's life or death. But that team solidarity, I was never in the Army, but all of my friends who are in the Army often have said to me, like, you never get relationships with other men the way that, because the degree of knowing somebody's story, the degree of time and mutual exposure, and it is through trial and error, you will offend each other, but then you just have to learn to be offended. You build thick skin, but there's a degree of mutual exposure and ultimately mutual comfort that becomes almost familial, and then that actually enables you to go carry out a common mission together. And that's the most masculine space, quote you could almost imagine. And yet, to accomplish it requires at least a site of cathartic mutual exposure in order to carry out that mission. I think that's an interesting relationship. Yeah.
So I guess what we're saying, and then we'll wrap it up, is men, talk about your feelings with your male friends. That's what we're saying here. Do it in a way that's smart and wise, aimed at a particular end, which is not just to do the thing for the thing itself, as Joe was saying, but to love God and love neighbor better, to be virtuous, well-adjusted people navigating a very hard, tricky life. And feel okay about it. That's what we're saying. But I have deeply appreciated this conversation. I would like to have this conversation more. But I mean, Kyle and Joe and I talk fairly frequently. So Joe, if you've got anything, now's your chance. Kyle, anything that you want to close with? All right. Well, all right, everyone, you can find us as always at the Davenant Institute YouTube channel. There you can find all of our previous episodes. We're also on Spotify, iTunes, all the other podcast catchers. But this will be the first time I do this, but Kyle, I love you, brother.
I was wondering if you're going to do that. You slipped and said it one time.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Well, I do love you, bro, and keep up the good work. We appreciate it, man.
Yes.
And keep thinking and talking and
cool
Joe,
stuff.
Yes, Joe, love you, brother.
Love you, man.
And we will see you next time.
See ya.
See ya.